to you by Penguin. The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. Read by Stephen Hogan. "Am I alone in thinking that the world becomes a more repulsive place every day?" asked Marigold, glancing across the breakfast table towards her husband, Christopher. "Actually," he replied, "I find that—" "The question was rhetorical," said Marigold, lighting a cigarette, her sixth of the day. "Please don't embarrass yourself by offering an opinion." Maud Avery, Like to the Loch, The Vico Press, 1950. Part 1. Shame. 1945. The Cuckoo in the Nest. The good people of Galeen. Long before we discovered that he had fathered 2 children by 2 different women, one in Drimoleague and one in Clonakilty, Father James Monroe stood on the altar of the Church of Our Lady, Star of the Sea, in the parish of Galeen, West Cork, and denounced my mother as a whore. The family was seated together in the second pew, my grandfather on the aisle, using his handkerchief to polish the bronze plaque engraved to the memory of his parents that was nailed to the back of the woodwork before him. He wore his Sunday suit, pressed the night before by my grandmother, who twisted her jasper rosary beads around her crooked fingers and moved her lips silently until he placed his hand atop hers and ordered her to be still. My 6 uncles, their dark hair glistening with rose-scented lacquer, sat next to her in ascending order of age and stupidity. Each was an inch shorter than the next, and the disparity showed from behind. The boys did their best to stay awake that morning. There had been a dance the night before in Skull, and they'd come home mouldy with the drink, sleeping only a few hours before being roused by their father for Mass. At the end of the row, beneath a wooden carving of the 10th Station of the Cross, sat my mother, her stomach fluttering in terror at what was to come. She hardly dared to look up. The Mass began in the typical fashion, she told me, with the priest's wearied discharge of the introductory rites and the congregation's discordant singing of the Kyrie. William Finney, a neighbour of my mother's from Ballydevlin, made his way in all his pomposity to the pulpit for the first and second liturgical readings, clearing his throat into the heart of the microphone before pronouncing every word with such dramatic intensity that he might have been performing on the stage of the Abbey Theatre. Father Monroe, perspiring noticeably under the weight of his vestments and the intensity of his anger, followed with the acclamation and the gospel before inviting everyone to be seated, and 3 red-cheeked altar boys scurried to their side bench, exchanging excited glances. Perhaps they had read the priest's notes in the sacristy beforehand, or overheard him rehearse his words as he pulled the cassock down over his head. Or maybe they just knew how much cruelty the man was capable of, and were happy that on this occasion it was not being directed towards them. "My family are all Galeen as far back as records go," he began, looking out at 150 raised heads and a single bowed one. "I heard a terrible rumour once that my great-grandfather had family in Bantry, but I never saw any evidence to justify it." An appreciative laugh from the congregation. A bit of local bigotry never hurt anyone. "My mother," he continued, "a good woman, loved this parish. She went to her grave, having never left a few square miles of West Cork, and didn't regret it for a moment. Good people live here, she always told me. Good, honest, Catholic people. And do you know something? I never had cause to doubt her. Until today." There was a ripple around the church. "Until today," repeated Father Monroe slowly, shaking his head in sorrow. "Is Catherine Goggin in attendance this morning?" He looked around, as if he had no idea where he might find her, even though she'd been seated in the same pew every Sunday morning for the past 16 years. In a moment, the head of every man, woman, and child present turned in her direction. Every head, that is, except for those of my grandfather and 6 uncles.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?